Hello and welcome to a brand new series of Snooker Vodcast in which we discuss everything in the snooker world from the greatest ever player to the most bizarre moments. Today's show is all about the greatest Triple Crown matches, and it's in the company of Neal, Foulds and Jimmy White, who usually are alongside me on the Eurosport couch, but of course for obvious reasons can't be, so they're in their front room, although it looks like Neal's in a working men's club. Hello Neal, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, not too bad. Dartmoor's still up, still working on that as a second career, you know.
And Jimmy, good to see you. Looks like you're waiting for the next series of Come Dine With Me to start.
Yes, mate, I'm trying to get on that programme.
We've got loads to talk about now, and it's going to be difficult, of course, for us to talk about the greatest ever Triple Crown matches. We've sort of condensed it a bit by using the word Triple Crown because, of course, there have been so many great snooker matches, and there will be people listening to this that go, well, you didn't mention this match or you didn't mention that one. But we're going to do our best to talk, to condense it as much as possible, right? There's far too many to mention in half an hour. So let's go back in time to the 1983 UK final that saw Alex Higgins beat Steve Davis by 16 frames to 15. Neal, I'll start with you. What I find amazing about that is that 3 years previously, Steve Davis beat Alex Higgins in the final of the same competition, and he beat him 16-6. So the fact that Higgins beat Davis and he did it by the odd frame as well, that really does put this match up there with some of the best we've ever seen.
Yeah, because it's not easy, is it? You play someone like Steve Davis and he hammers you, and it can leave a scar. And especially when there's an argument Steve was probably a better player in '83 than he was previously. So, yeah, that was a great performance. And we talk about the '85 World Final where Dennis Taylor was 8-0 down. Alex was 7-0 down in this match. So it looks like at that point he's going to get a hiding. And one thing about Steve Davis, he wasn't the sort of guy to take his foot off the brake and say, okay, well, I'm so far in front, I'm going to win anyway. He would have wanted to win every frame of that match. But Alex Higgins was inspired. And that was kind of a word that I think would describe his whole career. Inspired. The crowd got behind him. Things changed. And what becomes a game of playing on the table becomes something in the mind. And, he got to Davis. And at the time, very few people had ever done that before.
And Jimmy, your game, of course, is, I'm guessing, based on Higgins' game. And it must be very difficult for opponents, certainly like Steve Davis, to try and work out what a player like Alex Higgins is going to do, because there's so many times in a match and in a frame where you might leave the ball safe and all of a sudden Higgins pots the ball off a lampshade and goes on to win the frame. So it must be so difficult to play against.
Yeah, he was an incredible shot maker. But just reiterating what Neal said, Higgins was 7-0 down to Davis, and it looked like it was going to be, a good hiding again. Previous time he beat him 16-6, as Neal said. But when he was 7-0 down, Higgins, Davis played okay, but Higgins had made a lot of mistakes. I remember I was there watching it. And then he went on the second session, Higgins, he stole a few games on the colours, safety play-wise, which Davis is a master at that, like Mark Selby is today. He win most games that were scrappy. And Higgins won quite a few of the scrappy frames in the next session. And it sort of knocked Davis off his normal game. And he was always in the same sort of focus. He never looked flustered, Davis, but for some reason he did. He got wound up. He lost his stride. And Higgins went on to a crawler over the line. Amazing victory over, Davis was the best in the world at the time.
Right, let's move on now to another fantastic final in the history of the UK Championships. And that one wasn't too long ago, actually, 2018. Ronnie O'Sullivan beat Mark Allen 10-6. And it was a big one for Ronnie O'Sullivan. 7 UK titles, 19 Triple Crown wins. But probably best remembered, if that's fair, Neal, for Ronnie O'Sullivan sitting in his chair and pouring a bottle of water over his head.
Do you know, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, it was a strange thing to do, wasn't it, at the end of a match? Ronnie's done some odd things at the end of matches. I remember actually just getting away from it briefly. He lost in the World Championships, I think it was to Graham Dott, and he just gave a kid who was sitting in the audience his cue and case. I mean, who does that? I've seen him, he gives away medals every now and then, runner-up medals and all that to people in the audience. But so, yeah, on this occasion he won. He must have been overheating, I guess. It was a tough game. Look, I always thought he was going to win it. And, Mark Allen played a big part in that match. But I suppose we mustn't underestimate the fact that O'Sullivan has been around so long. We think, yes, it's another Triple Crown event. It's going to take him past all records. But maybe as he's got older, it's harder and harder to perform like that. And that was a terrific win because Mark Allen plays like a man possessed at times. He's such a terrific player. And through that tournament, he played very well. O'Sullivan was too good for him. It was more relief, I thought, at the end of that match than anything else for O'Sullivan.
Yeah, it was amazing to watch him show his true emotion. You know, all the hard work, all them years of trying to be the best, and that was to go in front on the Triple Crown wins. And you know, the way he celebrated, he jumped on the side barrier, and you know, I thought he would have gone and kicked on from there. Actually, I thought that was the one that said, right, I'm in front now. I'm going to try and make it 10 of each, and then sort of maybe hang my cue up. But he hasn't sort of produced since that final, and hopefully he'll look back on that very soon and get his cue out and start practicing and playing a few more tournaments.
Just one thing I wanted to add to that, you know, I mean, the UK Championship these days doesn't get a very good press because the Masters is a tournament that's going places. We know we're going to speak about that. You know, the Ali Pali is quite something now. The World Championships is what it is. It's a great event. But that UK Championship has always been up there, and all those great players have won it multiple times. You know, Steve won it all those times. He had that record. Stephen Hendry, another one that's dominated that tournament. Okay, the tournament's changed a little bit because the early matches used to be 2 sessions. The final used to be best of 31. It was first to 16 in those finals. It's a pretty iconic event, you know, with a good history.
Okay, all right. We're going to move on now to the best clashes of the Masters, and we're going to start with, I mean, they're all fantastic matches, but this one's going to be hard to beat. The 2004 final between Paul Hunter and Ronnie O'Sullivan. It was Paul Hunter beating the Rocket by 10 frames to 9. It had just about everything, this match, Neil, didn't it?
Well, listen, I mean, it's hard almost to talk about Paul Hunter, actually, without getting a bit emotional, because who knows how far he could have gone with his game. You know, he won 3 Masters and he won them all from behind. You know, he's one of these guys that he wasn't a very good front runner, strangely. I mean, I looked at all those Masters wins and almost every match went to the last frame. Even an easy win would be a 6-3 or a 6-4 to get into the final. And against Ronnie, he was 7-2 down. I mean, who beats Ronnie from 7-2 down, especially at the conference centre? But you also look at other stats in that match, and there's a very revealing one there. Paul Hunter made 5 centuries in that final. Ronnie didn't make any. So that tells you this guy was not somebody from yesteryear. People speak about how much the game's moved on. Paul Hunter was a great player, great scorer, and who knows, just if he'd have been world champion, I think he would have been, had he still been alive now.
The thing I remember about that final, they both had headbands on. Do you remember that? They're both wearing hairbands.
Well, can I just say, actually?
And they, go on.
I did look back over it, and Paul Hunter's got a headband, but Ronnie has got hair clips in. So he didn't actually have the headband, yeah. But,
you know, and it was all about Paul Hunter being the new David Beckham of snooker and that. And, you know, and as you said, in his previous 2 matches with Thurgood O'Brien and the other guy, he was well behind in them 2 matches. And for him to win a third one, 10-9, from being 7-2 behind with Ronnie O'Sullivan was an unbelievable feat. And as Neil said, we do really miss Paul Hunter, and who knows how many tournaments he would have won.
I think he's a very interesting player, Andy, because if you look back at his cue action now, we're not going to get too deeply into it. As Jimmy pointed out, what a great cue action he had. I've never seen anybody cue further away from the cue ball before they hit it. I mean, Cliff Thorburn used to do it. Most players, I mean, Jimmy White, for instance, would be a player that would cue so close to the cue ball, he'd always feather it. And occasionally over the years, he did do it. It would cost him. He would always admit to the foul. But with Paul Hunter, he was never going to do that because if you look back at the videos of him playing, his cue never got anywhere near the cue ball in the address. It was about 4 or 5 inches away. I've never seen anybody do that before. So he was a complete one-off as a player, you know. And as I say, a very inspired player. I don't think I've seen anyone who's better under pressure than him, because at any important pots, he would get them.
Okay, and we haven't even talked about what he did at the interval, but that's for another podcast. Right, let's move on to the 2017 Masters final. The 3 of us were lucky enough to be there on the Eurosport couch at Ali Pali. Saw Ronnie O'Sullivan beat Joe Perry 10-7, of course, famous for a record-breaking 7th Masters title for Ronnie O'Sullivan. Although, Neil, it was a struggle for him because he was trailing 4-1 at one stage against Joe Perry.
Yeah, and I think the thing about that match, Ronnie was a huge favourite to beat Joe Perry. No one really thought Joe Perry would win. I mean, he is, if you talk about the class of 92, he turned professional that year as well. He's not quite gone on to the same things, but he's still a leading player. He's in the top flight now. And Ronnie struggled early on in that match. It was 4-1, like you say. Joe Perry had played well. But in the back of your mind, you always felt that Joe would find it hard to get that match won. And Ronnie came back at the afternoon session, and I think when you got into the evening session, you kind of knew which way it was going. Typically, the London crowd got behind him. I mean, the old conference centre and the Ali Pali are quite something for crowd involvement, you know, and that's why one of the reasons, apart from what a great player is, why Ronnie's been so successful there. But as just said, the longer that match went on, the less likely the shock seemed, you know. And I think again, to win all those Masters, you know, is quite an incredible achievement by O'Sullivan. I still don't know why he didn't play in it this year, but I mean, that's not a question for me to answer. But I mean, it's a shame because he kind of made that venue his own and that tournament his own, really.
And Jimmy, although of course Joe Perry will be desperately disappointed with how it turned out, he's got to take a lot from the fact that he got to his first major final at the age of 42.
Yeah, you know, Joe's in the top 16 now. You know, he's playing some great stuff, and to get to that final, as Neal said, he was 4-1 up there, and Ronnie O'Sullivan, me and you and Neal was in the studio. He was really struggling. You know, Joe should have took advantage and probably pressed onto there, but maybe see the winning line. O'Sullivan to go and win 7 Masters, you know, at this standard is just a phenomenal feat. You know, it goes down as one of the greatest matches of all time.
He has, of course, still been beaten in finals, most recently in the 2019 final, and been beat convincingly against Judd Trump, who was just absolutely faultless. Wiped the floor with him, I think it's fair to say, by 10 frames to 4. Incredible victory for Judd. Yeah,
and I think that was a real indication that Trump has moved on with his game, because he'd always been, listen, he was a brilliant player, age 12. He was 14 winning big pro-ams, so he should have turned professional then, but it took him years to get through. Then he got to his world final, he won his UK Championship 2011, but then he was almost there to be shot at, had some bad performances in big events. But that first session, I don't think anyone's ever played better. He was 7-1 up against Ronnie O'Sullivan. He took him apart, and that's almost a glimpse into the future and where we are now with Trump. You know, we know how great a player he is now.
Yeah, Jimmy, how important do you think that victory for Judd Trump was in the context of going on to become world champion and then dominating the sport?
Absolutely. You know, that was a stepping stone. Prior to that, a couple of years ago, he beat Ronnie 10-9 in Romania in a ranking tournament. But the way he played in that first session was a bit like the way he played in the first session against John Higgins in the World Championships. You know, when he was just phenomenal. And to take Ronnie O'Sullivan apart 7-1 like that, Ronnie didn't really play bad. He just didn't have a chance. Every long ball Judd went for, he knocked in and made a significant break. And, you know, he was, for me, that is like springboard him into the player he is today. I think that actual match gave him the confidence.
Before we wrap up talking about the Masters and move on to the World Championships, Neal, is there any, I mean, it's a crazy question, but any matches we've left out? I mean, the one that jumps off the page for me is obviously that man below you, Jimmy White against Kirk Stevens. What a fantastic match that was. But any others you can think of?
Well, I mean, I think 84, the year that Jimmy won it, was a big year. I mean, I don't know how he feels about it. I've asked you this before, Jimmy, but did the crowd always help you, or did sometimes it prove to be too much pressure on your shoulders?
If you're playing well and you're confident, there's nothing like it. You know, it's just a boost. You know, it's like crowd surfing. You know, it's just incredible feeling. But if you're struggling and you haven't got confidence, it can be such a burden for you, because they are screaming for you to pop balls. And you know yourself, when you're properly focused, you don't really hear the crowd too much unless someone stupid shouts at something. But most of the time, you just you get into the focus of the game.
Well, let me ask you then, before we move on, Jimmy, I'll start with you. Your best match, the one you enjoyed most at the Masters, would be which one?
There was one match when I touched the ball, and as Neal was talking about feathering the white early on, and I declared it. I would have beat Thorburn that year. I ended up losing to him. But I had so many great matches there, you know, and I had some disappointing matches there. But, you know, I think I played in it about 20 years. I've got to say, obviously, the one beating Griffiths to win it. The match that year with Kirk Stevens, that people play that pink all the time. A bit of controlled flair, which Trump has. Not a lot of players have that. So, no, I'm just honoured. I can't really pick out. There's so many, and it was always a pleasure to play there. It was a London venue.
We're going to have a quick break, and when we come back, we'll turn our attention to the World Championships. We'll see you right after this. And welcome back to Snooker Vodcast, a brand new programme where today we're discussing the greatest matches in Triple Crown history. Before the break, we were talking about the UK and the Masters, and of course, it's time now for the World Championships. Neal, let's go back to 1982 is the first one we've picked out, where Alex Higgins won his second world title. He beat Ray Reardon 18-15 in a fantastic final.
Yeah, and of course, without going into it, the semi-final, the match with Jimmy, that was the incredible clearance that he made, and that's the reason maybe that Jimmy didn't win that year, because I think he would have beaten Ray Reardon in the final. That's my view. But anyway, what really we remember most of all is the celebrations afterwards, which I'm sure Jimmy will tell us more about, the way he brought his daughter out. But he actually finished off with a really big break, 135, I think. It hadn't always been a classic. And it's safe to say that Ray Reardon took it very well, because I don't honestly think him and Alex had a lot in common. I don't think they were great pals, but Ray Reardon typically, took that defeat pretty much on the chin. And it's one of the great moments in sport, I think, that.
What's your recollection of that final? Of course, Neal makes a great point that arguably the greatest break in snooker history happened against you in the semi-finals to stop you getting to the final. But it was another final, we spoke about them before, where two players contrasting styles as well. Was Higgins' favourite going into this one, do you think, Jim?
Yeah, he was favourite going into that match. And, even though Reardon had got to the final, he'd not played sort of great stuff. And there was, a lot on my match with Higgins. The way he won that match, sometimes it was a writing on the wall. That clearance he done was phenomenal. He potted about 5 or 6 balls where he was probably, like 4 or 5 to 1 shot to pot them.
Right, let's move on now to another fantastic final. It's the 1985 World Championships, probably the most famous final of any final in snooker, Neal. Of course, it went the distance. We know Taylor was 8-0 down. It went to a black ball, and it was just incredible. 18.5 million people watching that one after midnight.
Yeah, and the last frame lasted over an hour. If you look back on that last frame, you might have thought the whole match was poor, but actually, I mean, it was a terrible frame of snooker, if you like. It was brilliant to watch. The drama was incredible. Everyone was, on the edge of their seats watching it. The standard wasn't very good. I don't even think there was a century in that final, was there? It was certainly one of the matches where there wasn't any breaks, and Steve cracked a little bit at the end. I mean, that black that he overcut to win it was not an easy shot, but he missed it by so far. It just set everyone on the edge of their seats, and it's amazing to think Dennis won the world title that year, not because he wasn't going into the World Championship. He was clearly playing very, very well. He won his first major event the year before. But really, it shows you what the game is. And I think that's where Shredsville, Jimmy's favourite expression, originated that very day.
And Jimmy, when you look at that final frame, Dennis Taylor potted a fantastic brown, great blue as well. And then the pink was tough because the white was on the cushion. But then I just got the feeling he just kept going for the black. He went for a couple of doubles, one across the middle, one up and down. You sort of wonder if fate was on his side that day.
Absolutely. As Neal said, Davis cracked, but he also cracked Taylor, because a couple of times he just hit the black 100 miles an hour. He wouldn't care who was watching, just hopefully it went in somewhere. But, I was delighted for Dennis Taylor. I remember where I was, and I watched it. It went on quite late as well. I think it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. But, it was fantastic for the game to see Dennis Taylor win. As you said, we had 18.5 million viewers. Davis recovered very quickly. And, he talks about that now. He does lots of tours with Dennis Taylor, and they talk about that match. And whether Davis is lying or not, I don't know, but he seems to be okay with it.
Yeah, I'm sure he's lying. I'm still, it hurts even today. Listen, that was a fantastic match. Another great match is one that was quite recent, actually. Judd Trump finally becoming world champion, I think at the age of 30, beat John Higgins 18-9, Jimmy. And as he said, the standard from Judd in that final was up there with some of the best snooker we've probably ever seen in a world final.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. Going back to that Masters where he beat O'Sullivan 10-4 from going 7-1 up. That was the same sort of snooker he did against John Higgins, and it didn't matter what John Higgins threw on him. Neal will correct me if I'm right. I think he had 4 centuries in that final, John Higgins, and so he wasn't playing bad stuff. He was just phenomenal, Trump. Any chance of a long ball, and when he was playing safe, he was putting John Higgins tight on the cushion. Just not a lot you can do it. And when player at that standard produces that type of form, it's more or less impossible to beat. And we've seen 2 sessions of snooker there that we'll probably never see again.
Neal, let me ask you, you and I, in fact, Jimmy as well, but Jimmy was playing it, but you and I, Neal, go back years and years working together on the snooker, and I'm talking about even Premier League snooker.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I met Judd, I was with you, obviously, and he was, I think, 16 or 17, and he was playing the likes of Jimmy, and Stephen Hendry was playing at Davis and Ronnie, and there was loads of expectation. Everyone said he's going to be a future world champion, and it probably took longer than we all expected with the talent he's got. Now he's won it, and he's won it in that fashion. Do you expect him to go on and win multiple world championships?
I do now, because I think when a player wins the World Championship for the first time, it can go one of two ways. I mean, I remember, Joe, obviously, when Joe Johnson won, he did get to the final the next year. He had a pretty miserable season throughout, actually, until that final. First-time champions don't always play the same. But in Judd's case, the way he's gone on in the season, which is just coming to an end, to play the way he has, he's won 6 ranking events. Now he just wants to be a winner. He realises all the hard work that goes in means that he can do it again. So in answer to your question, I'll be surprised, very surprised, if he didn't win it again at more than one occasion. I think 3 or 4 times minimum.
Okay. Jimmy, a horrible question, but I'm going to ask it to both of you, but I'll start with you, James. So after we've discussed those matches, and maybe some we've not even talked about, your favourite match in the history of the World Championship would be what?
It was a great delight to watch Higgins win the world title in '82. As for snooker wise, I think Trump winning this year, he took it. I seem to see Trump go from this player that frustrated Neal quite a lot, more than me really, because he was such a great player but not producing, to all of a sudden connect all the dots, realise that he can practice. He's got to be favourite for the World Championship this year. So I'd have to say Trump's final against John Higgins was the best snooker, I think.
Okay. And Neal, same question to you?
Well, I think that the close finals, obviously there's been matches gone down at the last round. Jimmy's been involved in one of those. We know the 85 final. But the other one that never really gets a mention is the Peter Ebdon year, 2002. He beat Stephen Hendry 18-17. So that's another match that was a bit of a nail-biter. Ebdon, probably one of those guys, if you could pick someone to clear the colours to save your life, he'd be on that list, and the pressure didn't get to him. So, again, it's a bit of a forgotten final, but it was a classic. And it was Peter Evans' only title, so I'd throw that one in as well.
That's it. That's all we've got time for when we've been looking back at the greatest matches in the history of the Triple Crown events. So it's a goodbye from Neal Foulds. Bye-bye, Neal Foulds.
Yeah, goodbye.
The whirlwind will let you get back to your dog walk. See you soon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye for now.